Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is George Fârte. I'm the coordinator of the panel Multimodality, Political Semiotics, and Media Reality. Firstly, I'd like to warmly thank you for your presence. I strongly believe you'll be rewarded with valuable insights on the topics addressed by the panelists. Over the next 90 minutes, we'll listen for presentations of 15-20 minutes each. At the end of the presentations, the speakers will answer your questions and comments. Please post your questions and comments via chat during the presentations so that we could efficiently discuss them in the final part of your panel. For organizational reasons, the order of the last two presentations will be reversed. My presentation will be the last in the panel. If I will not coordinate better the panel, I have no chance to do my presentation.
Thank you, Ilie, for your understanding, and thank you very much for the chance to be present in two places in the same time. If the audience allow me, I want to be the first presenter in this panel to take the chance to be in manage another session. If you agree with this.
You want to be the first
yes.
one? Okay.
Yeah.
Please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. So I need to share the screen. Yes, yesterday morning, one of the first day of the conference, we tried to decipher together a little of the charm of the narratives. So for those who did not attend my presentation yesterday, I will resume the initial ideas. So Misha and Ivan, for you, it's not new anything in the beginning of my presentation. So I saw some authors will say that we love narratives because always say more than say, and often something else that they seems to say. More than that, while the speech is argumentative, the story is indicative. I does not expose a theory, but show a state of fact related to a situation without too explicit demonstrative intentions. I does not provide answer, but simulates their search. Not only does it maintains dialogue or relationship between the communicant, as Paul Václavic liked to call it, but it gives the audience a certain freedom to interpret the messages. So we should not be surprised that the human mind is a story processor, not a logical one, as Jonathan Haidt said. Yesterday, we also talk about politicians' preference for narratives. Politicians like stories at least as much as we do. We return to our question. However, how can we explain our fascination with stories? The fascination we have seems that politicians also benefit from. For this, we choose to start from the ideas of shapes of the story, later known as emotional arcs of the story, belongs to the American writer Kurt Vonnegut, well known to the public for his work that combines satire, black humor, and science fiction. Of course, he did not think that his master thesis in anthropology at the University of Chicago, in which he exposed for the first time the idea of the shape of the story, will be rejected unanimously in the Department of Anthropology because it was so simple and looked like too much fun. Episode which took place immediately after World War II. Fortunately, a few years ago, a group of students at the Computational Story Lab at the University of Vermont in Burlington, noticing simplicity of Vonnegut idea, an important research potential, and discovered that all narratives follow the profile of some emotional arcs. Basically, they test Vonnegut idea with the help of artificial intelligence. In the picture, you can see Kurt Vonnegut talking about shape of a story. Actually, an emotional arc was imagined like a graph of a function of real variable x, which designate the time interval of the story, beginning and end, and two-dimensional Cartesian coordinate system. The dependent variable system, y, can take value in the range ill fortune, great fortune, and designate certain emotional states of the main character along the narrative thread of the story. Procedure for generating emotional arcs developed by the team of researchers I mentioned earlier is based on a specific sentiment type analysis of text and data mining. For this, the author used a happiness index called Hedonometer, developed with the Computational Story Lab at the University of Vermont. Understanding language is one of the most notoriously difficult problems in artificial intelligence. We semioticians know very well this question, but we have been looking for models for constructing meaning for some time. Yet there are abundant clues to the emotional behind of written text, which computers can recognize even without understanding the meaning of the words. For their research, the group of researchers I mentioned chose as corpus for open access platform Project Gutenberg. You can see in this image the procedure for selecting certain books. And they filtered a set about 1,000 fiction stories. The results was surprising even for them. Not only was Vonnegut was right, and the emotional experience of the character in the narratives analyzed due curves similar to those he describes. Moreover, they discover that of the many possibilities, the dynamic of emotional arc for all the narrative analyzed follow only 6 patterns. You can see these patterns in the image. Moreover, the most downloaded, an indicator of the success to narratives for the public, followed by 3 preferential distribution type of emotional arc. In this table, you can see these 3 types of preferential arc in front of the public. Their research stopped here. They did not provide explanation for such a preferential distribution. So I put the question and I try to analyze each of the distribution of emotional arc obtained by researchers using a mathematical model of discretizing the curve of emotional arc in a simple arc-shaped trajectories by a vector that follow the simple trajectories up, down, straight, or forward. See the results in this in the next slide. If you can look carefully at this mathematical distribution, we have 3 possible options for a main character of the narrative: or the favorable situation, the neutral one, and unfavorable situation. And for this, you have the many combination, and the mathematical model stress which combination we have in this case. Returning to the first picture of the Kurt Vonnegut idea on the graph and the discretized mathematical model that I propose, you can see that the intention actors, as Umberto Eco will say, have only one chance to make the preferential arc that researchers talk about in their research. Moreover, you can see on the figure that the most preferential arc follow some kind point of inflection, SV3, SV4, and of course SV2 again. For every choose of the many possibility, we can see this point on the narrative stories, on the trade of the narrative story, which something has happened. From the mathematical point of view, this distribution function like an inflection point. What is the inflection point in mathematics defines? Sorry, I can put my screen on the whole window. An inflection point is defined in mathematics as the point on the curve in which the sign is taken another sign. So, is the inflection point the explanation for this distribution? For the mathematical reason, the answer is yes, of course. But what is this inflection point in semiotic terms? What is this inflection point means in the narrative terms? What is this inflection point means in our authorities choose of the many possibility? Cognitive researcher I mentioned before yesterday have some explanation. Paul Zak arguments that when we told story to another one, our brain secretes some kind of hormone that called this hormone oxytocin, the moral molecule. Another researcher, which is more often for our research, prove that between the brain of reader and listener is produced some kind of neural coupling. In semiotic terms, it's some kind of similarity in terms of iconicity between the distribution of emotional arc of the story in the mind of the speaker and in the mind of the listener. And this creates some kind of neural coupling in French term on some kind of mise en abîme in the narratives. So this mathematical model explain this distribution and the mirroring point between the reader distribution of emotional arc and the listener distribution of emotional arc. Because in our studies we try to understood emotional arc in terms of the character but seen through the eyes of the reader, because dictionary is measured on the opinion of the audience, not the opinion of the writer or the authorities of this kind of. So I try to test my model in different communication situations. For this study, which is the name Faces of Fear in Political Discourse, or Build the Image of Political Enemy Through Speech, I try to analyze 3 different ordinary narratives which refer to the constructing the enemy image through speech. So you can see the corpus and some kind of example. This is you can see an article immediately after the Romanian Revolution in 19th, which is about a mother from and the bad experience with her sons. And in this another communication situation belongs to the Romanian Europarlamentary woman who stress an experience of old men. And this you can see the well-known personage in Romanian public scene, which denounce a public conspiracy that put her life in danger. After analyze this communicational experience through this mathematical model, I obtain some kind of patterns, which is a very interesting distribution. For every sequence, which you can see in the image, I identify the model of type of American researcher talk about. So my question is, the discourse of this type of narratives follow some kind of patterns which is similar to American researchers? Why these social and political actors choose these patterns for stress their ideas and to change the public agenda on conspiracy in this way? Is a strategical one, is a semiotic one, and for explanation, I use another model, which is the model of Albert Einstein, which stressed at the beginning of 20th century the light have two behavior option. The light is a wave and the same time is particle. My first part of this study that I talk about today, it's the wave. It's the wave dimension if you want to interpret in the future. But what is the particle? What is about the particle behavior in this studies? Regarding the particle behavior, the discussion focuses on the quality of the character and his relationship with the narrative context. My co-author will detail this aspect immediately after this panel in a roundtable, Conspirational Narratives on Our Times and Their Communicational Effects. So I invite you to discuss about these results. And I want to stress just there are a couple observations on this last behavior. The enemy is always alterity, the stranger. The referent of the narrative is always abstract one, not a concrete one. It is the reason why you don't need special character but ordinary people that to be present in such kind of narratives. Once the framework is created, it is easy to index the people in this kind of frame. The ideology specific to the totalitarianism has a similar logic, as you well already knows. Who is actually the referent? How do I choose it? The simplest choice states the condition of possibility for what we call populism appears. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ilie, for your kind option to give me the permission to present first. And if you have some question for me, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
I would have a question if possible, please.
Please, Horia. A very
Very
short
interesting,
question.
very interesting presentation. I congratulate you, Mr. Sorin. And I was impressed by your example based on wave interference. There in that experiment, there are two aspects regarding the nature of light, the continuity and the discontinuity. And I think in your mathematical analysis, you emphasized some aspects regarding continuity, the variation of mental states in terms of affection. What about discontinuity? Do you think we could link discontinuity to those inflection points? How can we treat this pattern you talked about in terms of discontinuity? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Horia, for your question. Yes, you're right. The discontinuity refers only in mathematical terms in this model. In semiotical terms, the discontinuity does happen. It's not important for our research, because what is matter in the studies is why I try to explain the similarity between the distribution of emotional arc between the experience of the writer, the authorist, and the experience of the reader. This is important. In mathematical terms, yes, the discontinuity it's important because introduce some tension in the narrative structures. But I stress already that this model we can should interpret in terms of what Einstein understood by the wave behavior. But in terms of particles behavior, we can begin the discussion in the next panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Dragan, you have another question from Ivan Fomin.
Shall I read it, or is it okay if it is just in the chat?
The question is, can we show that non-populist political narratives are built in a different way? What is the difference? The question of our colleague Ivan.
Yes, the difference I mentioned early in one of the slides. From semiotic point of view, the referent is abstract one. This kind of choose from the authorist part is very interesting because they not interest in the special people. The interest in the constructing the frame of the guilt. And for this, we don't need the special person. We need to ordinary people. This kind of logic is very similar to our already told is totalitarianism logic, or if you want, the logic of the beginning of this the millennium in the beginning of Christianity, when the few apostles addressed to the public the ordinary people, the people who don't talk anyone. This kind of this narrative reproduce some kind of this type of logic. This is the main difference. We don't need the important political actors or social actors. We need to build a frame.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's pass to the next presentation, habituation, typification, and logonomization, actions and institutions in an integrated conceptual framework of Persian phaneroscopy, social constructionism, and social semiotics. Please, Mr. Fomin,
Yes,
present
thank you.
your material.
Thank you. Let me just turn on the screen sharing. Okay. My today's presentation is kind of, I hope that it can be framed as a continuation of yesterday's roundtable about semiotic analysis. What I will try to do, I will try to explore what tools can we use to integrate different semiotic approaches and different approaches that are outside of semiotics but are kind of have some potential of being integrated with the body of semiotics. To give some context, this work is a part of the project that is called Knowledge Transfer and Convergence of Methodological Practices. And in fact, Gheorghe-Ilie, who just gave this his lecture before, is is also a participant and in fact the supervisor of this project. And in this project, we try to develop some instruments that help us integrate different disciplines, different approaches, and different methodologies. And semiotics in this regard can be used as one of the most potent transdisciplinary methodologies that transcend disciplinary boundaries and subdisciplinary boundaries and boundaries of different fields of knowledge. The way I see the development of semiotic analysis can be described in this metaphor of two frontiers. The first frontier is this frontier of semiotic material, and the second one is the frontier of semiotic methodology. What I mean is that as the semiotic analysis emerges emerges and develops, we can notice that one trend is this extension of the material that is considered an object of semiotic analysis. So we start with language, then we become multimodal, then we also take a microanalysis, do macroanalysis. So we try to extend the set of objects that are studied. Today we had this presentation about interactive objects that are also an important material for analysis that also can be kind of included in this semiotic material. So this is the one frontier. Another frontier is this frontier that has to do with integrating different semiotic and quasi-semiotic methodologies. So it's about bringing more consistency into the semiotic methodology itself, and as well bridging semiotic methodology with other fields. So, and my today's presentation is mostly about this second frontier. In particular, with one particular issue. This is the issue of integrating three quasi-semiotic and properly semiotic and quasi-semiotic traditions that are the Peirce's semiotics, Schutz's phenomenological sociology, and systemic functional social semiotics of Hodge and Kress. So as a starting point in this attempt to find a way to integrate and productively use these three frameworks together, I take actually the definition of action, the concept of action as it was defined by Max Weber. And in fact, Weber's definition of social action is quite semiotic one. So actually, Weber defines social action as a behavior with a subjective meaning. So basically, this is I think this makes sociology almost a semiotic discipline. Another important starting point for my analysis is this triad of interpretants, three kinds of interpretants that were distinguished by Charles Peirce. So for Peirce, there are three different effects that are produced by sign. The first is the initial interpretant. This is the meaning or the mental effect of the sign. The second is dynamical interpretant. This is the actual event that is the effect of the sign. And finally, there is final interpretant, that is the habit that appears as a result of this sign functioning. And as I connect these two ideas, taking social action as a sign and looking for three interpretants that are produced in this process of social action semiosis, I suggest this theoretical framework that allows distinguishing three aspects of social action. The first aspects of social action is basically the action per se. This is the meaningful behavior, the action that has some mental effect for the one who acts and for the one who interacts. The second aspect is this aspect of event. That is to say that one social action causes other social action, and this is the dynamic interpretant of the social action, if we speak in persist terms. And third aspect is the aspect of habituation, that is the production of final interpretant in persist terms, that is the fact that social action precipitates social institutions. Now to social institutions. Basically, there are multiple ways to define what are social institutions, but one of them that can be suggested is that social institutions are habits that human beings devise to constrain human interaction. And from this point of view, social institutions are very similar to what is called logonomic systems in systemic functional social semiotics of Gheorghe and Kress. Just to remind the original definition of logonomic system is a system of rules prescribing conditions of production and reception of meanings. So who can talk, who can communicate, on what topic, in what modes and modalities, and so on. Importantly, what Gheorghe and Kress add, they say that logonomic systems do not exist just somewhere in the clouds. These logonomic systems themselves are reproduced and existing as sets of messages. And based on this, I suggest introducing the concept of logonomic signs. So these special signs that are devised to convey constraints that kind of constrain the production and reception of meanings in different circumstances. So now if we go back to this triad of interpretants, I would argue that we can also distinguish between three kinds of interpretants of logonomic signs. Well, what do I mean with that? So we can distinguish between logonomic understanding, that is this mental effect of logonomic signs, logonomic actualization, that is the fact that logonomic signs produce some other acts of semiosis as a result, that is the dynamic interpretant in persist terms. And finally, there is logonomic typification, that is the production of habit of logonomic meaning making that is brought about by a particular logonomic sign, and in persist terms, that is final interpretant. And if we now integrate these two triads, the one triad of the three aspects of the social action, and the other triad is the triad of the aspects of social institution, we have these two interconnected levels or phases of semiosis. What is important here is that this concept of typification is in fact a gateway or interface concept to connect this whole framework to the framework of phenomenological sociology and social constructionism of Alfred Schutz, because in fact, if we go back to Schutz, typification is the central category of his phenomenology, and Schutz puts a lot of emphasis on the fact that, and in fact, he puts this emphasis on the fact that social action relies on our knowledge of previous acts and on our assumption about the typicality of our action, that there is this assumed repetition, assumed habit, in fact, that is one of the conditions of social action. And in fact, it's a continuation of one of Husserl's ideas about how social phenomena work. And it strongly resonates with Peirce's ideas about habits, how habit is a tendency of action of being repeated. So we can see a lot of affinity between these two versions of phenomenology. One is Schutz's, and what other one is Peirce's phaneroscopy. So to add some one more nuance here, we can actually connect these two phases or two aspects of the functioning of social action and social institution to this idea of Gheorghe-Ilie, who suggests that there are two tendencies in the evolution of semiotic systems, one of innovation and another one is standardization. And this is exactly what we can see in these two phases of social semiosis. That is the innovation that appears in this social action phase, and standardization that is enabled with the mechanisms of logonomic systems in social institutions. To give some example, it's really difficult to show how social action works in itself because there's always some logonomic systems working. But let's say I want to, I'm kind of forced to innovate. Let's say I'm using a Zoom call. I'm in a Zoom call, and I don't know how to raise a hand here because I'm first time in a Zoom call. Maybe my camera doesn't work, so I don't know how actually I raise my hand. So what I do, I can, for example, maybe I don't know about the special button with the handing with the hand. So what I can do, I can, for example, put a hand emoji into the chat. So how does it work as this social action process? Well, it works as an action because this sign I use produces some mental effect for myself and for my peers. And second, there is an event. For example, I put this message in the chat, and there is another semiotic event that I'm given the opportunity to ask my question. And thirdly, if I repeat this this way of communication, or maybe other people start doing the same thing, there can appear this habit or this institution or this logonomic rule of what is the appropriate way to ask questions. It doesn't have to be this way. I can also turn on my mic, for example, or I can just write in the chat that they want to ask a question. Now, so that was about the social action. Now let's go to the social institutions. Well, as an example of how social institutions work, we can, for example, take a look at the program of our conference. So here we have the scheme of our panel that kind of prescribes the order in which we speak, and the platform in which we speak, and the topics of our speeches. And we can also see that, for example, the order in which our names go is this. First, it has a mental effect for us. It also has an actualization aspect, that this is the order that is actually, even though we broke this order, but it was expected to produce some kind of actual events in social reality, and to prescribe some other acts of semiosis. And finally, if we follow this kind of scheme many times, this is not my first conference, for example. I'm kind of used to taking part in the conferences, and I have this typification going on, and this habit of following these kinds of logonomic systems. Okay, I'm finishing now. So this is my last slide. So to sum up, we can actually find a way to bridge the three traditions that are person phaneroscopy, phonological sociology, and social semiotics in this integrated framework of semiotic analysis of social institutions and social actions. And in this integrated framework, institutions are precipitated by social actions as their final interpretants in persist terms. They are conveyed by logonomic signs in social semiotic terms of Hodge and Kress. And finally, they are reproduced as typifications in Schütz's terms. That's all. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you. I have a comment, a short comment. Friedrich von Hayek, the economist Friedrich von Hayek, distinguished between planned order and spontaneous order. For example, a company, an NGO, is a planned order. We have a strong control on it. But spontaneous order is just a byproduct of social actions. It's similar with your affirmation, institutions are precipitated by social actions. Von Hayek said social institutions like society, language, the market are byproduct of our actions. We can't design the market. We cannot control the market, but our intentional behaviors influence, mold the market. What do you think? The ideas are similar. Are the similarities and differences between your perspective and Hayek's perspective?
I think it's an interesting idea of Hayek, and I think we can actually, this is actually a hint that there are, I wouldn't say that there is this border between spontaneous order and planned order. I would say that there are just different levels of stability of different social institutions. So we can have some ad hoc rule that we have for this particular conference, for example, and we have a social institution of a conference that is much more stable. But overall, the basic principle is the same, that those institutions are precipitated by actions, but yeah, the stability of those institutions and those habits can vary. And this is a very important comment. Thank you.
If you have another questions or comments.
I would like to put a question, please. Very interesting presentation also. I would like to ask Mr. Fomin if he can apply this model in discussing the profile of contemporary societies. I mean, Western society, Eastern society, Middle East model of society. Do you think this model of yours applies different when we discuss different types of societies? For example, in Western societies, there are some types of institutions that are very well organized, but the secondary effect, the collateral effect of this thing is the fact that individuals do not have any more personal solutions. All their solutions to a crisis are standardized. How would you comment this situation in perspective of your model? Thank you.
Well, yeah. Oh, here I will just probably refer to Gheorghe-Ilie's lecture that was just before this session, because yes, in different society, in general, the whole idea of having logonomic systems is to have some external constraints that help us endure different instabilities that appear in the environment. So yes, and that's why many of the Western institutions are exactly these kind of tools, these external constraints that provide some stability. Well, they're kind of ambivalent. On the one hand, they provide stability. On the other hand, they limit our ability to innovate, and so yeah, there's this ambiguity there.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fomin, for your insightful presentation. In what follow, daiva zavistani vicene will present communication manipulation with internet media headlines in the flow of media literacy. Please, and Vilja Chelieșiene. I'm sorry for my pronunciation, but
it's
okay. Very
okay.
difficult for me.
It's okay. Our surnames are pretty difficult to be pronounced. I agree. Lithuanian words are difficult. So I will share my screen and yeah. So hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to make the second presentation in this conference. And we are the lecturers from Kaunas University of Technology. We are from Lithuania. So the topic of our practical research is manipulation with internet media headlines is the flaw of media literacy. So the authors are Vilja Chelieșiene and myself. Relevance of our research. In today's digital world, society must not only be able to use information and communication technologies properly, but also be able to identify, select, and use the information it needs responsibly from a variety of sources and critically evaluate it. A critical approach to the media is particularly relevant when it comes to the ability to resist manipulation. Media literacy is also perceived as a competence to draw attention to and publicize the negative aspects of the mass media, such as misinformation, fake news, and propaganda. One of the negative aspects of the media is incorrect headlines that manipulate textual information to persuade the reader to buy that information. The headline becomes a means not to inform, but to cause intrigue and thus attract the reader's attention. This presentation studies the headlines of two of the most popular internet news portals in Lithuania, Delfi LT and Elrytas LT, and the use of expressive means of language expression as a way to manipulate information and attract the reader. The aim is to identify the trends in the use of language tools, their relationship with the context, and their impact on text comprehension and the reliability of the information. 260 headlines have been analyzed in our research. Recently, due to the accelerating pace of life and the desire to get as much information as possible in the shortest possible time, short texts have become a priority. Often the reader prefers the information in the headline without reading the article itself. Therefore, attracting the attention of the audience is an important aspect in order to interest the consumer of information and retain him within the boundaries of information media. All of this has led online news portals to create ambiguous, vague, and inappropriate headlines for articles to provide information that seeks to manipulate the reader and thus get as many clicks on that article as possible. Emotions, but not information, become the basis of popular media. Emotionally charged vocabulary, expressive language tools are often deliberately used to achieve an impact. Headlines that use expressive language tools such as metaphors, figurative verbs, comparisons, idioms, quotes, rhetorical questions, they complicate the perception of a problem or a certain fact and often create ambiguous meanings and perform a manipulative function. As I said, a total of 260 headlines from those two Lithuanian news portals, Delfi LT and Elrytas LT, were analyzed. And as the diagram reveals, the most commonly used means of expressive expression are figurative verbs, making 30%, of the sample, and quotations making 27%, with metaphors and idioms being less common, and rhetorical questions make up only 5%, and they are found the least. Now let us analyze each of those expressive language tools. So the first is figurative verbs. In headlines with figurative verbs, all expressiveness is concentrated on just one word, and that is the verb. Such headlines are in the form of a sentence, and the verb plays the key role in them. In the headlines examined in our research, such verbs are one of the most commonly used expressive means of a language. So these are some examples that we found in the headlines. So I wrote the English translation in brackets, that is easier to follow what I say. So for example, people in pharmacies sweep medical masks. So the verb sweep in Lithuanian and in its figurative meaning means to do something very fast, even with the broom, if we take the literal meaning of the word. So in this heading, it creates a picture of buying all products till they are not in stock anymore, and the meaning is hyperbolized. Reading such a headline, the first question is, why do people behave like that? What is going on? What's the big deal about medical masks being swept out? So it can be assumed that in this way, the author of the headline tries to cause panic and entice the reader to read the entire article. The second example shows the coronavirus has hit several other airlines, and the flights to Italy are stopped. The verb smorge in English means to hit, to blow, and the author not only wants to hyperbolize and highlight and increase the importance of the described events, but also he provokes the reader's interest. And the intrigue is also caused by lacking information on the specific airlines, which airlines stopped the flights to Italy. And the third example refers to the very popular sports in Lithuania. It's about basketball, that our Lithuanian team, Žalgiris, knocked the Chimki club over with the necessary score. So patiesti, in the general meaning, it means to spread something flat. But in this case, it has the meaning to defeat. So the reader is intrigued and he is curious to read more about the match. The second group of our sample is metaphorical nouns. So using metaphors, the actual name of an object or an action is omitted and replaced by the name of the phenomenon being compared. So the metaphor in headlines becomes a means of encouraging the reader to decipher the hidden information. So the following are the examples. Vilnius residents were horrified by the treasures coming to the Neris River. We do not know what treasures the author means, but actually the meaning is the shredded plastic. And the second one, Vilnius residents are worried about one of the most unique districts of the capital. It would turn into the anthill. So anthill means that that district of the city will be very densely populated. And two more examples that tag spider webs prevent Lithuania from becoming the financial center of the region. So the spider webs, it's like the possibilities for taxpayers to borrow money easily from the banks. And the last example, the pranks of the 10th grade students are that they cheat during tests and share tests online. So what are those pranks? Pranks in the negative meaning that the students are dishonest and they are still spreading what they found from their colleagues online. The third group is the idioms. Although idioms are well known and well established phrases, and their emotional expressive effects on the reader should be somewhat weaker compared to other linguistic means, but they are often used in headlines as means of influencing and engaging the reader. Well, the following examples need some explanation when we speak about three persons in the example. Landsbergis is our Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Skvernelis was the ex-prime minister, and Nausėda is the president of our country. So Landsbergis, the Minister of the Foreign Affairs, reacted to the ex-prime minister's statements about the president, that he digs a bigger hole. And what does it mean? What a hole do we mean? The whole is that wishing for some bad things to happen, to do something bad. And the next example is a difficult decision for our president is, will the footsteps of our former and the ex-president Grybauskaitė will be followed. So the meaning with those footsteps, to follow somebody's footsteps, means to behave similarly, take the same actions. And the third example is Polish border traders rub their hands. So the meaning, the figurative meaning of rubbing the hands means to be very happy that, you know, the traders, they will be in favor, their business will flourish, and they will be very successful there. But there have been cases where manipulating idioms, moving from indirect meaning to the direct meaning, creates ambiguous headlines. So, for example, there have been such cases, and we found examples of them. If we translate that sentence, the dog is buried there where we left it, where we buried it. So the first thought would be, what happened to that dog? And maybe that is the cruelty to animals, but the meaning is different. The author of the title deliberately seeks to intrigue and uses the idiom, the dog is buried, šuo pakastas. That means the discovery of the essence and the real cause of something. The next group is quotations. So there are two subgroups, direct and indirect quotations. Quotations and headings reflect intertextual relationships. Direct quotation in the titles and of articles creates an impression of authenticity, as if bringing the mentioned person closer to the reader, and it seems that there is no longer a mediator, a journalist who tells the story. So if we take this example, Šimonytė regrets about the entry of electricity from Belarus into our country. Šimonytė is our prime minister. So the second example is opozicijos atstovai, like opposition representatives. So this refers to our parliament. Indirect quoting. Indirect quotation help the author to place a short and intriguing phrase in the headline, and often it is taken from a particular context and with little relevance to the content of the article. And the following examples illustrate that pretty well. The first one is about famous lawyer Aušra Ručienė, about the dangers of her work, that she always carries a gun. So just a hint, making the reader and intriguing the reader to read the article about that gun. And the second example is about famous economist in Lithuania and politician, about Mauricas, that he evaluated the situation in Lithuanian economy, that it is crisis only for some people, but not for everybody. Some groups of our population, they simply thrive at this time. Some words about rhetorical questions. So rhetorical question is a question that does not require an answer. It only expresses an emotional affirmation or denial. So in portal headlines, the answer to it must be usually understood by the reader himself or herself. Asking rhetorically, the author of the headline conveys his thought with a vivid emotion and the experience of a strong feeling. These questions are commonly used to make the reader think and to create a contrast. and to persuade. So, for example, Blato is the famous basketball coach. Where else could the Final Four take place if not the Istanbul? And the next example is how many lives, how many more lives would these weapons take? Definitely, it's a rhetorical question. And then the last one, is that a halter for the freedom of speech? So it's like a deliberation about certain limitations for the journalists, what they can write and what they cannot. So the last group is expressive headlines. It has been observed that expressive headlines and the linguistic tools used in them often make it difficult to comprehend the information itself. At the same time, deprive the reader of the opportunity to understand what will be written in the text. For example, the panics, the coronavirus missed one place. So missed, it's like it didn't come to a certain region or certain town, like there were no cases of coronavirus infection. And the second example is the case of the abuser of little town, Jurbarkas in Lithuania, unlocked a painful problem, as if nobody knew about that problem. Of course they knew, but it was locked in people's minds, and now it is unlocked. And a couple more examples that not having this device at home can cost not only your life, but a huge fine. So it's really very expressive in a strong word. And the last one, that good news announced that COVID-19 outbreaks in these institutions just soon disappear from the map. So these institutions will no longer have any COVID infections, and people are okay after vaccinations, they don't get sick. So the creators of such headlines, instead of stating the essence of the content, they seek to intrigue the reader by manipulating the information and forcing them to read the entire text. And our conclusions, our research conclusions, that the headlines of online news portals, which often become standalone texts, that determine an article's popularity, aim to use a variety of means of language expression as one of the ways to manipulate information to engage and attract the reader. In the studied headlines, the emotional expressive function is best realized by verbs which affect the reader's attention figuratively, and the headline becomes dynamic and causes readers' interest. And quotations, as one of the most commonly used means of expression, often gives the reader information that does not correspond to the content by manipulating his consciousness, as if confirming the authenticity of the information. And the expressive linguistic tools used in headings such as metaphors and verbs and comparisons and idioms often make it difficult to understand information, and at the same time deprive the reader of the ability to understand it perfectly that will be written in the text. And this violates the main function of the title, to briefly reveal the entire essence of the text, to inform the reader about the content of the article and the events it tells. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A short comment and question. You have clearly presented the rhetorical devices used by a journalist for manipulating information, for transforming information in a commercial media product. But what do you think? Media consumer are easy prey, easy to manipulate, or we are vaccinated, we have an immune system that allows us to resist to manipulation.
Exactly. I absolutely agree with that. That we think that we are vaccinated, and from the headlines, people can already distinguish whether they will get the true information, what is written in the article, or maybe that headline is just, you know, a catch for a consumer to click on the article and see that there is only a couple of words related to the headline, but the essence of the text is absolutely different. Well, I cannot say that different, but it is not that catching as the headline. So I would really hope that we are vaccinated from this. Yes, thank you. Thank you for your comment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So at the end of our panel, I will present my communication signaling populism and anti-populism in the Western media sphere. Although the word populism is often used in everyday conversation in the political arena, in the media and academic literature, it's difficult to objectively describe and explain populism, especially right-wing populism, as any other social fact. Why? The word populist carries a negative connotation that arouses people's emotions. It's about unpleasant feelings. Many people lament the existence of populism, condemn the adherence to populism, and seek effective means of eradicating populism. People are scorned for being populist. It's easier to come out as gay, lesbian, or transgender than as populist. Laden with a cluster of negative emotions, populism is often investigated with fear, hate, or disdain. The word populist is also a floating signifier that does not and cannot possess a definite meaning and a unique and constant referent. The word populist is used as a weapon in the fight for political hegemony. More exactly, politicians and opinion leaders use the word populist as a dismissive label for demonizing and ostracizing their political opponents. Given these facts, the quality of being populist seems to be found everywhere. There are populist politicians, populist political parties, populist social political movements, populist electoral programs, populist political messages, populist political measures, populist political events, populist gestures, or maybe there are populist hairstyle. Populism is attributed to general traits, a form of illiberal democracy, a thin-centered ideology, an illiberal democratic response to undemocratic liberalism, a philosophy, a loose set of ideas, a discursive frame, a flexible way of animating political support, an irrational response to economic change, a mode of political practice, or a style of politics, an elusive and chameleonistic phenomenon. But populism is attributed non-specific traits. For example, many people said populists share a Manichaean outlook. They divide society in two categories: the pure people and the corrupt elite, the friends and the foes. Populists prefer, embrace monoculturalism, national self-interest, closed borders, and traditionalism. Populists have a strong preference for charismatic leaders. Supporters of populism are people overwhelmed and disoriented by societal changes and diversity, placed in a weak and vulnerable economic position, convinced their voice does not matter in politics, and seeking a positive social identity. Right-wing populists are also stereotypically associated with racist, fascist, white supremacist, anti-Semitism, sexism, Islamophobia, and homophobia. In spite of these very diverse stances on populism, one may say that populism can be analyzed as a social fact. Populism is an identifiable, stable, and knowable fact, and it transcends individual reason and will. The main thesis of my communication are the following. Signaling theory allows us to detect and understand the emergence and fluctuations of populism besides the results of the election. To mobilize the populist electorate, candidates must honestly advertise their readiness to endure the marginalization inflicted by the mainstream agency. To advertise their populishness, politicians disseminate in the media sphere politically incorrect messages that provoke the mainstream. Sometimes these messages look like aposematic signals indicating special capabilities for defense. Anti-populist stance correlates with the manifestation of belonging to the mainstream. Being part of the mainstream entails public criticism of populism. In fact, many anti-populists just pay lip service to it. The main signal theory representatives are Amos Zahavi, John Maynard Smith, Ellen Graffan, Rebecca Bird-Bleach, and Eric Alden Smith from evolutionary biology, and Michael Spence from economy. He dedicated his analysis to the markets with asymmetric information. What the signaling theory essentially says, using signals, the senders advertise an attribute or quality that it's difficult or impossible to observe and fulfills the receiver's needs in order to get a positive reaction. I provide two examples showing off his impressive feathers. The peacock signals his health and strength to mate with peahens that want to select not a partner, but the best partner. Attaching to his curriculum vitae the diploma obtained at a prestigious university in a hardcore specialization, the candidate signals his superior competencies to be selected by the employer who wants to hire not a concurrent, but the best concurrent. Signaling theory imply a signaling cost. People live in a signaling system that impose a signaling function. And the higher the risk of cheating, the more onerous cost the signaling system imposes on the signalers, and the more noisy the environment, the more often the signalers are asked to advertise the quality required by the receivers. So in a noisy environment, the senders must repeat frequently the sinners, who ask politicians to advertise populism, forgotten losers of globalization and migration, people who feel they lost their valuable jobs, prosperity, and way of life without getting something worthwhile instead, people who consider themselves unrepresented or at least underrepresented in political decision-making forums, people who feel they cannot politicize their problems, concerns, or interests, even if they may do it in principle, people who feel they cannot express in the media sphere their identity, beliefs, and demands genuinely, although they would have the constitutional right to do it. In brief, populists have to cope with the hostility and the political disdain of mainstream media, opinion leaders, and governmental parties. Populist voters consider themselves very important outside and against the mainstream, being a problem of perception of the place occupied on the mainstream marginalized axis. In various circumstances, populist electorate can increase or decrease dramatically. For example, many British voters wanted the United Kingdom out of the European Union and called for a referendum. As long as this demand has been overlooked by mainstream parties, the Populist Party, the UK Independence Party, rised. But after the Conservative Party organized a referendum and completed the process of UK's exit from the EU, the UKIP went into decline. In 2015, the UKIP got around 4 million votes, and in 2019, it got just 22,000 votes. What is the most reliable signal of populismus? What must signal populist leaders in order to attract populist votes? Populist electorate trust politicians who advertise that they are outside and against the mainstream. The signaling function requires populist candidates to be politically incorrect, more precisely, to send messages that scandalize the mainstream. A true populist leader must be scorned and marginalized by the mainstream agency. I remember Hillary Clinton's declaration about so-called white trash being the voters of Donald Trump, and Donald Trump became an outsider, a marginalized, a scorned leader, even if he was a very successful entrepreneur. Example, in the pages of the publication of the newspaper, the New York Times, Donald Trump was associated with racism, nativism, xenophobia, sexism, narcissism, and bigotry. In the pages of Le Monde, Marine Le Pen and her supporters were described by the labels like extreme right, fascist, anti-Semite, nationalist, demagogue, racist, reactionary, protectionist, extremist, negationist, isolationist, vicist, collaborationist, and homophobic. In Italy, Matteo Salvini appears as a marginalized leader, getting on Twitter very radical message. I selected just one of them. To Salvini, they have to plant a bomb that blows up his house with his children, and that slut he has at his side. Populist leaders are marginalized on social media. For example, Donald Trump account was permanently suspended, and 50,000 so-called adherents of canon conspiracy have had also their account on Twitter suspended. What are the most reliable signals of anti-populismness? Delimitation, a public delimitation of populism, whatever that means, virtuous signaling, more exactly, people inform others by means of mass media or social media of their socially acceptable alignment on an issue, trust in mainstream parties, praise of expertise, belief in permanent progress. Partial conclusions: populism is anchored in the liberal democratic system and also in the signal system. Populist voters and populist politicians reach and maintain an honest signaling equilibrium because the cost of signaling are structured in such a way that dishonest signals do not pay. Right-wing populists and mainstream conservatives share many political stances on public issues, but they differentiate themselves by the willingness to provoke the mainstream and accept political marginalization. Anti-populists advertise their willingness to be included in mainstream. So we have a strong opposition between mainstream and the marginalized, or within mainstream or out and against mainstream. Both populist voters and populist leaders must manifest themselves out and against mainstream. In the written version of my communication, I will systematically present the expressions through which the populist leaders provoke the reaction of the mainstream, and the expressions through which the mainstream signaled populist marginalization. For this panel, I present just some illustrative examples. Thank you very much for your attention. So we have 7 minutes to discuss not just about my ideas, but about all presentations. Please.
I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Gheorghe-Ilie Fârte. Very interesting presentation. I would like to ask you if we can speak about an evolution of populism, taking into account some periods, some starting point. I don't know, an increasing period of time when many types of politicians arouse. Do you think we are now on top of this evolution, or we are only in the beginning? Thank you.
I think he's not anymore here. Maybe it's an internet connection problem.
I think we have some problems with the connection. Yes.
Yes, now he's back. So, Mr. George, can you repeat again your answer, because you were disconnected?
Populism emerged with the liberal democracy. So if we want to have a history of populism, we should start with liberal democratic societies, not before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so another question from Alexandra Wanka. Are you planning to discuss why some mainstream parties, politicians are explicitly anti-populist and others are not? Sometimes conservative parties pick up some populist themes, topics, but conservatives cannot honestly signal populismness, because they are not willing to accept a marginalized position in within society. So there is no populist mainstream parties. As soon as a populist leader enters the mainstream, he lost his populistness. He lost his credibility before the populist voters. But populism is associated with a sense of disempowerment, disenfranchisement. If people could politicize their problems, their concerns, populism is not possible to rise. So the rise of populism is a symptom of the flow of democracy. I hope I answered the question. So we could, for other question, we have another 2 minutes.
Very soon we have to close the panel, because the Zoom time is at the finish.
Okay, thank you very much for your presence, for your active participation, and I hope we will keep in touch. I noticed some very important ideas from many of you, and I hope we will collaborate in the future. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.